I must tell you that if they move west to east to try to take the square, they'll move right across our position. So far, they haven't done that. There are students running behind them, throwing rocks, picking up debris from the concrete on the square, and hurling it at the soldiers. But again, the soldiers have not yet broken ranks, nor have they fired tear gas. Well, no tear gas, but from where we are, 100 yards away or so, you can certainly smell the smell of cordite from the gunfire. Unlike what we've seen up to now, this is not friendly harassment. These are not demonstrators that can surround the troops and stop them. The troops are all armed. They look to be quite threatening, and the students are too dispersed here to be able to surround them and stop them.
Now, a short time after correspondent Richard Roth gave us that account of the scene in Tiananmen Square, CBS News went back on the air with another special report. As we went back to correspondent Richard Roth for an update, we heard the dramatic and chilling sounds of his capture by Chinese soldiers.
You hear that gunfire?
We do hear it.
Okay, we've got to get out of here. They're after Derek now. They're ripping away his camera. They're ripping away his camera, and they're coming for us. We're trying to move back and move away.
CBS News special report. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Bob Briefing. This is New York. Does anybody hear us? This is New York. Does anybody hear us? Hello, this is New York. Does someone hear us there? Hello, this is New York. Does anybody hear us?
That's the last we heard from Richard Roth and Derek Williams, his cameraman, who was at his side. They were on a cellular telephone, and clearly, well, we think what happened there at the end was after Richard Roth was taken by the Chinese soldiers that the cellular phone stayed on for a while. You heard New York trying to reestablish contact with no success. President Bush, we were told, is keeping a close watch now on developments in Beijing from his vacation home in Maine. The president had some critical words for the Chinese government today, and CBS News White House correspondent Wyatt Andrews is with us now from Kennebunkport, Maine. Wyatt?
Good evening, Dan. The president did keep abreast of all of the developments in China today from his home here. The #2 man from the National Security Council, Robert Gates, was with him physically throughout the day. The White House decided to issue its toughest statement yet on China, deploring the crackdown in Tiananmen Square today. The statement describes the Army action, Dan, as ugly and tragic. It was a statement released both here at the Kennebunkport White House operation and also by Secretary of State James Baker in Washington.
We really deplore the violence that evidently is taking place now in the People's Republic. We consider that tragic. We have been urging for many weeks restraint on the part of both sides, and we've seen a great deal of restraint, and we've been very pleased with that. And we've seen a great deal of restraint on the part of the Chinese government over the past several weeks. We're sorry now to see the situation turn rather ugly and chaotic.
The president,
at least in urban China, I think it's very likely that we are going to see protests continue in major cities, perhaps including Peking itself. We certainly will see various kinds of slowdowns and strikes and sit-downs in Chinese industry. This is by no means over yet. It could get much worse.
Dr. Harry Harding. Betty Ballard, we haven't heard much from any place outside of Beijing. Does that mean it's quiet, or are we just not hearing anything?
I think you're not hearing anything because they have not heard from the central government. The evening news last night was only broadcast to Beijing. Beijing had the news of the troops coming in. But as far as I know, the other cities didn't know anything. And I think, like so many things nowadays, the news will have to go out of China to America and other countries and then go back to the Chinese-American grapevine into China, into the other cities.
Now, what does this mean for China? Let's assume for the moment, a big assumption, let's assume for the moment that the Army keeps the lid on. Deng Xiaoping and Li Peng and the others keep the lid on. Now, does this mean business goes back to usual for China?
Maybe just on the surface, but underneath will be a volcano. And that volcano can erupt any time. And I think the leadership knows that. And besides their natural paranoia, they will have to deal with the fact that on the face of things will cover up this great resentment and this now hatred.
And we have only a few seconds left, but Deng Xiaoping and his hardline forces, they have the gun. What can any other Chinese do?
There are a billion of them.
Betty Ballard, thank you again for being with us.
Gathered to hear and deplore the news. At the Caltech campus in Pasadena, students listen tearfully to phone conversations with relatives in China, their accounts of the bloodshed, the names of the dead and injured.
The Army is closing into the campus of Beijing University. They are now around 100 to 200 meters away.
A few miles away at the Chinese consulate, more news accounts, more tears, a desperate call for help.
Everybody around the world who believes in democracy, believes in freedom, should now stand up and show their support.
The news hit especially hard in San Francisco, home of the nation's largest ethnic Chinese population, where several hundred demonstrated at the consulate.
And I feel really upset and, very sad about this whole situation. And I just feel I should be here because I cannot do anything else.
In New York and Louisiana, more anger, more frustration, and worries about relatives back home in Beijing.
Your brother is in the square, or he may be.
He may be in the square. He was one of the hunger strike. The 12 people refused food and drink.
Meanwhile, at a student gathering in Boston, a phone report from home. A pregnant woman gunned down.
They just shoot her. I can't believe they did that. We should stop this. Everybody should say no. Chinese government, stop this. They can't do this.
Despite their anguish, some of the students vow to return home in time for what they're sure will be another skirmish for democracy. Dan?
Thanks.
At Tiananmen Square. There are many people in the square. The government had a deadline 1 hour ago asking that this square be cleared. And you heard very ominously from Li Peng an indication of how this government feels about anybody in this square right now. I'm quickly going through my notes. I've been writing very, very quickly here. Just bear with me for a second because it's a very important quote. As I reach for that, Li Peng at one point said that we are taking tough measures to crack down on the riot in order to separate the student movement from the riot. Li Peng charged that, quote, others are trying to take advantage of the student protests. He said that unless we do something, we, the government, the future of China will be strongly threatened.